So yes, introduction to the weekend from me. So as you know, and as Kayla's just reminded us, we had those 2 weekends at the start where we kind of introduced ourselves to the system, started thinking about things a bit. Then we're in the middle of 3 weekends at the moment looking at particular parts of our democratic system. So we had that quite tough weekend last time looking at the roles of government and parliament. This time, we're going to be focusing in on the roles of the public in our democracy. Just before I say a bit more about that, a word about weekend 5. So many of you might have noticed that there's been quite a lot in the media since we last met about various MPs who've been found to have been breaking the rules on what MPs can do, or at least been accused of breaking the rules or abusing the rules. These are some of the things that we'll be exploring at the next weekend, at weekend 5. So some of you might well want to think about that and talk about that, and you will get the chance next weekend. So this time we're focusing in on the roles of the public, and our big question is how should members of the public be involved in decision making? So just to start off our thinking on that and to remind ourselves about some of what we've covered in previous weekends. So as we've said before, at the democratic system, the very heart of the democratic system is the people. Democracy means rule by the people, ultimately. But there are loads and loads of decisions that are being made every single day. It wouldn't remotely be possible for all of us to be involved in making every one of those decisions. So we need to have representatives who do a lot of the kind of day-to-day work of making those decisions. So that means that we, the people, elect our representatives in Parliament, and from Parliament then is formed the government, as we explored last time. So there's that system of representation, so that we are represented at the heart of power. And then there's also a kind of a relationship going in the opposite direction, a relationship of accountability as well. So the ministers in the government are accountable to Parliament. They have to answer to Parliament for what they do. And the MPs in Parliament ultimately are accountable to us as well. And if we don't like what they're doing, then we can vote them out at election time. So we have those relationships of accountability going in the opposite direction. And there are many parts of the democratic system that are designed to help ensure that those kind of core activities of representation and accountability work hopefully effectively. So obviously there are elections through which we choose our representatives in Parliament. And I should have said, when I'm referring to Parliament there, I could mean the UK Parliament, but also there's of course the Scottish Parliament, the Welsh Parliament, and the Northern Ireland Assembly as well. So we've got elections to all of those. Crucial to all of those elections are the political parties. We often get very frustrated with political parties. They can feel very kind of irritating. But if you try to imagine how elections would work without political parties, how would we work out who we want to vote for, or who we need to hold to account for what's been going on if there weren't political parties? So the political parties are a really important part of the system. Also important, if we're going to be choosing who our representatives are or holding them to account, we need to have information about what they would do, what they have done, all that kind of thing. And we get quite a lot of the information from the media, and various other sources as well might be important in helping us to understand what's going on in the world of politics. And then also, so the representative system isn't just about us voting in our representatives and then kind of leaving them to it. It's also important that we can, if we want, express our views to our representatives, let them know what we think. And we can do that directly through writing to our MPs, speaking to our MPs, or we could take part in pressure groups, campaign organizations, trade unions, and business organizations. All of these are different kinds of pressure groups, and we can take part in demonstrations and so on as well. So lots of ways in which we can have our views heard among our representatives. So that's the representative system. And as I've said, that representative democracy is an essential part of our democracy. We couldn't have a democracy if we didn't have that representative process. But as I've also said, we often find it really frustrating, and we feel that our voice isn't sufficiently heard in that system, or that system just isn't working well enough. So one of the big questions for us to be thinking about this weekend is what's needed for the representative system to work well. But that's obviously a huge question. We could spend many weekends talking about that question, and we don't have that time. So we're going to focus particularly on two questions within that. So one is, what, if anything, do people need from the system in order for the system to work well, in order for us to be able to take part effectively in the system? So what do we need in terms of how the elections are working? What do we need in terms of the information that we can get about what's happening in democracy, and so on? So that's one question. And then another question, what, if anything, do people need to do themselves in order for this democracy to work well? So if none of us took part at all, we just wouldn't have a democracy. Democracy just wouldn't work in any way. So do we need to take part? Do we need, just how much do we need to take part? Do we need to take part in particular ways? Do we need to speak in particular ways? Do we need to engage with each other, listen to each other in particular ways? There are lots of things about questions about what maybe we need to do in order for our democracy to work effectively as well. So that's one set of questions, but then there's also another set of questions. So there's actually kind of three ways in which we might think about how democracy should work. So one view of democracy is that we should be able to rely simply on that representative system that I've just set out, that system of elections and parties and so on. That should be enough, and actually that's the best way of making decisions, that where everyone can have their say and things are properly thought through before the decisions are reached. But another view would say that, well, actually there should be ways in which people can make things happen between elections. So not just that people can express their views to their representatives, but actually if enough people say, this is what I think, this is my view, then there should be consequences to that. And referendums and petitions might be two ways in which people can have that kind of direct say on what happens. And then a third view would say that, well, actually, what's really vital in a democracy is that we are speaking with each other, listening to each other, working out what we think together, coming to kind of collective understandings on what should happen. That should be really at the heart of democracy. That it's not enough just that we're taking part in these big kind of elections and referendums, that we're taking part in the discussion about policy as well. And citizens' assemblies are one example of how that might be done, and there are other ways of doing it as well, which we'll be hearing about later this morning. So there are those three views of democracy. So getting back just to the questions for this weekend, we've got first that set of questions that I already laid out about the representative system and what needs to work for that representative system as a whole to work effectively. But then we also need a second set of questions about what role, if any, should be played by other bits of the system that perhaps are used less often, but might be, you might think are important: referendums, petitions, citizens' assemblies, and other similar processes. And also with those, we should be thinking what's needed for these mechanisms to work well. So just as what's needed for the representative system to work well, also if we're going to have referendums, petitions, citizens' assemblies, and so on, what's needed for those to work well as well. So that's it from me for now. I'll hand back to Kayla.